Hi, I'm Mike. Friends have been asking me what I've been up to, and well, here we are on New Year's Eve, last day of 2020, and it's been a heck of a year. I kind of got it into my head a couple of months back that given that I wasn't going to be able to travel anywhere this winter, and I'm just here on my own, that I needed to do a few things to kind of, well, push back against winter. I suppose you could say to embrace winter, but I'm not Norwegian. They have a word, which I'll put on the screen for you in a minute, that is very difficult to pronounce. But basically what it captures is their notion that there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing. In other words, get out and do it anyway. I'm not really that into those sorts of winter sports, so what I wanted to do was to find a way to simply enjoy myself despite the winter. I've always liked fires, camping, those sorts of things. I've liked the idea of a fire pit, but I've been a little bit leery about how that's going to go in the wintertime. So, my friends have been asking me how I put it all together here, because I've been telling them about it, and so I'm going to tell you about it now. I started out with a basic fire pit. I got it at Wayfair. I won't give you exact prices, but just around 300 bucks. It has a screen on top that's required by my local city ordinances here. And where I placed it is on a cement patio that I've got at the back of my house. It's an older house. I'll show you the back end picture in a minute here. It's appropriate distance from the house. There's no tree up above it. I pruned a little bit up there to make sure it was clear. And that's the basics. But of course, when it gets cold out, the heat goes straight up and you don't benefit from it very much. So I did a couple of things to take that into account. First of all, I drove one of these stakes in back here, and if you can see that, I'll give you a close-up picture of one of the other ones I've used. They're called T-fence posts, or sometimes J-posts, and you pound them in using a metal tube. It's about that big with handles on the side with a top on it. You put the tube over the end of it and bang it into the ground. They use it for snow fencing, so winter stuff, right? The J or T posts that I use, you can find them, again, various garden supply centers and stuff like that. People use them for gardening, fencing and stuff like that. Usually around 6 or 7 bucks Canadian. The other thing you can do, and I've got an example of them back there, is just rebar. That again, any building supply store will sell. It's cheaper than the T-bar fencing. And I pounded a couple of those in to support the back of the flue that's up there. So that works reasonably well. The other thing I've used the T-bar for is I placed several of them around the fire area here, and then what I did was I got a large tarp and cut it in half long ways so that I left the eyelets along the top, and then installed a couple of hooks in the wall of the outside of the house, so I can start there with one of these. It's about a 5-foot high tarp, hook it over the hook at the edge of the house there, and then run it along, and on the top, and I'll show you a close-up of one of those too, on the top of the posts I've got these little tarp clips. It's a very cool thing. They make these called tarp clips, where you just unscrew them, slip the tarp in and screw it up, and it holds the top of the tarp. So essentially what that means is I can make a little wind wall here if I want to. Now we're lucky here in Calgary, we don't get a ton of wind, and if we got a lot of wind and it was cold, I probably wouldn't be out here at the fire. So, but for a little bit of breeze and stuff like that, especially if it's coming from that direction, which is east from here, it's going to be running into the back of my neck. I can do a little bit about that with something I'll show you in a minute, but to be able to kind of cut off that breeze, I can basically position a windbreak either this side or around the back here or over that side there. I don't necessarily need to do the whole thing because I'm only trying to block the wind from the direction it's coming in. I've got behind, and you'll see in some of the pictures, a wind sock up here so I can look out my house window and do my thinking before I come out about how I need to get set up for the evening. It doesn't take me very long. I got a pile of wood out by the garage, bring it over, stack it up, lay it out, as I'll show you later, and fire it up, and then while it's catching, the burn is catching, I set up my chair, and I'll show you how I do that in a minute. And so I'm ready to go with a glass of wine or a beer or whatever I feel like drinking, and in about 5 minutes, piece of cake. Then what I've got behind the fire there are a couple of pieces of slate slabs that I found down the side of the garage. I'm renting this place, so there's all sorts of little treasures lying around. And so what I did was I wired those up up to the support and put them in behind, and then covered the front of them just with some sheet metal that I got at the local hardware store. And what's holding it up there, if you can see, and I'll show you a close-up with those two, is just a C-clamp, a standard C-clamp that I got at Canadian Tire for a couple of bucks, that clamps on there and holds that nice and tight. So that's the basic arrangement. It then reflects everything over in the direction of what I'll show you later is where I sit and how that gets set up. I put a little flue pipe coming out the back there with a little gooseneck going up, and I got a it's called a duct fan. You can get them at a whole bunch of different places, hardware stores and stuff like that. I got mine in Prince's Auto, and basically it fits to the top there. I can plug it in and it runs a fan, and so it'll draw the smoke back, away, and up. And I don't use that very often. Basically when the fire burns down quite low, sometimes it gets a little smoky, and so I can put the flue pipe on, but otherwise I don't really need it very much. In terms of the actual wood, I had local outfit deliver kiln-dried or seasoned birch, nice birch bark. It's kind of a hard wood, so it burns nice and hot, burns long, and the nice thing about birch is it doesn't spark. So while you might like that sort of snap, crackle, pop, when we're in the city like this and you want to make sure you're keeping control of those sorts of things, birch is a good way to go. I'm going to set up tonight and show you my New Year's Eve burn, a little bit of that, so I won't talk any more about the fire pit setup for right now. What I will do is step back and talk a little bit about kind of what I've got on top here, which you can't see right now, in the way of it's basically a tarp, but I've made a few modifications that make it work rather effectively. You may notice I'm getting dripped on a little bit because it's actually just below freezing with the sun out here, so we're getting a little bit of melt off the top there. Anyway, I'll show you that in a sec. One other thing I wanted to mention before I reposition here, one of the things that happens, and those of you who had outdoor fire pits know about these sorts of things, is the heat from the fire will melt whatever little bit of ice and snow is in the front there, and then sometimes that freezes up again. It's a little bit like an ice rink there, which is unfortunate because that's right where your seat fits, so when you're getting in and out of your chair it's a little bit slippery. You can certainly make sure that you clean it off well when you do get a bit of snow. We had some about a week ago and I took a bit of shoveling and stuff like that. But another thing you can do just to get rid of ice from time to time, towards the end of the fire, maybe when you're going to be sort of starting to clean up, what I did was I went out and got a couple of sheets of metal. I got those, you can see a little picture of an automobile there. I got them from Canadian Tire. I think people probably cut them up to patch up their automobiles, real do-it-yourself stuff. So this is about the biggest size they had. Clamped a couple of them together, and what I can do is just lean it up against the fire like that, and it directs the heat down and melts all the ice that's in front there. Another thing I'm going to use this for, I'm going to see once it gets colder, and I'll talk about temperature in a minute, what I'm going to do is take these and bend them here back and put them so they're sticking out over the top of the fire from the back of the firewall behind there. And what that's going to do is basically redirect some of the heat down and towards me so it keeps the area warmer. There's an outfit in the States that actually makes a metal table, thick metal table with folding legs that you can place over a fire pit or even over one of those propane fires, that the smoke goes around it and it directs all the heat down and out to the people sitting around. Not so bad, but they're not cheap. Landed in the States are between $450 and $500, and I didn't even look into shipping to Canada. I wasn't going to go that far with it. I'm just going to say a little bit with the setup that I've got here about the tarp or the ceiling I've got over this little setup here. Basically I wanted a tarp so that I could be out here in the rain, I could be out here in the snow, and obviously when it snows I don't want to have to dig out all the nooks and crannies either. So I wanted a tarp, but I didn't just want kind of a, I mean it is a camping tarp, but what I got was they make what they call a heavy duty or a premium grade tarp. So it's silver on this side, which is nice heat reflective color, and on the other side, which you can't see, is black. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to make it completely adjustable. And so what I did was I built a ring around it and this is just basically electrical conduiting that I got at a building supply place. Got little wood dowels that fit into the corner pieces to kind of join them up, and then for most of the corners I put the standard electrical connectors on it as well, and that holds it together quite nicely. I made it just a little bit bigger than the size of the tarp, and then connected the tarp, there we go, with some zip ties, and then on the sides I actually connected them with U-bolts, because my original thought was that if I could take those off, and then I could actually take it apart and store it somewhere when I wasn't using it. And I've sort of gotten my head around the idea that maybe I'm just going to leave it up all the time. I wanted it supported across the back rigidly, and I'll show you some close-ups of that. But basically what I've done is I put conduit poles up the side of the house, screwed into wooden blocks, which are screwed into the wall of the house, so that I've got a conduit that I can then attach rings to and attach it to the back of the tarp structure, so I can raise and lower the back end of the tarp. I've made that possible by putting some eye bolts across the top, again into wooden blocks up there, and I'll show you pictures of those, and then just running some thin line clipped to the edge of the tarp, and then through an eye bolt in the middle it comes down, so I've got it, and I'm just pointing over here, it tied off so I can actually raise and lower the back anywhere I want. Front corners here, these are those extendable painter poles that you can get. I found them on sale for about 30 bucks a piece at Canadian Tire, and so these are at their lowest at the front here, but actually the advantage of this is I can change, especially with the rigid edging around the outside of the tarp, I can put it in any kind of configuration I want. My original thought was I might actually, for example, tip the part that's attached to the house down quite low and this part up a little higher so that I get more heat reflectivity. Problem with that is if it snows, all the snow runs down the wall, and that doesn't work. So I pretty much got it in a kind of solid state here, where it's high up the wall there, up above so I can see out the window, and lowest down here. And that seems to work reasonably well. I've got guy wires attached to these poles, and I've actually got the tarp thing tied directly to the top of the pole so the wind doesn't lift it off. It's been out in some pretty stiff wind and hasn't gone anywhere, so far we're okay. The advantage of this setup is that I can actually, if I want, change the direction of tip. So if I want, I could bring it down so that instead of having it go this way, it's actually attached this way, back up to the house over there, and that would be if I'm out here in the rain and I don't want to get dripped on. Coming down over the front, as you can see, we get a little bit here. I've already got a thought about how I'm going to be able to put a drip edge along there, and then all I'll do is tip up that one corner over there a little bit, and the drip edge will then run along and down like this. The drip edge helps because when the fire's on, this gets just warm enough that if there's any ice there, it melts and drips. Normally from where I sit, that just means that my boots might get a little dripped on. But other than that, that's it. Okay, well, I'm bending over here so you can see me. So my setup for the chair is real simple. It's a plastic or resin Adirondack chair, less than $100 at Canadian Tire. Just stack them up in the corner here. I've got several in case we're ever allowed to have people over again. Set one of them up right there. And then one of the first issues I discovered was with the cold air coming in from behind, my rear end and back get quite cold. So what I did was I ordered a couple of these. It's an orange tarp on one side, so you get lost in the woods, you'll be visible. The other side is a one of those emergency blankets, completely heat reflective. And basically I just put that over the back of the chair like that and push it in. And just going to make sure, if you see any smoke here, it's that's a whole other story. I got a smoker for myself for Christmas, and I'm doing my first cook today. That's a whole other video. Anyway, once I get the lining in, then got a sleeping bag. It's good for 7 below. Lay it on like that, up over the top, push it in like that, and I'm all set. Now I can cover up completely if I want. The nice thing about this is I can get this up around the back of my neck like that if there's cold wind coming that way. What I find typically, coldest I've burned so far is 10 below. I think I'm probably good till about 20 below once I'm fully set up, but around 0 to 5 to 10 below, I find to use this just as a chair liner, and then the direct heat reflected from the barbecue, I actually from the fire pit, I actually have to back up a little bit sometimes because there's so much heat coming off directed in my direction. So works reasonably well. Obviously, if I get back to a point of having company, then I'll clear out a little more here and I can have more seating around for other people. But for now, it works just fine, just for me. I typically try and get out every evening, have a fire up and going by about 6, so I can put in my earphones and listen to the CBC News and catch up if I care about what's going on. Otherwise, just some music. I've got a headband light, so if I want to read, I can do that, but I've also got a light behind me here beside the barbecue that I can put on, and it's enough light to read. And then, as you'll see this evening, I've got some restaurant grade lights in the crabapple tree off to the side here, and just some decorative pinpoint lights over there in the lilac bush, just to kind of brighten the place up a little bit and help me, as I've been saying, push back against winter, or embrace winter, I suppose, but I like the pushing back idea a little bit better. Okay, I'm going to light my New Year's Eve 2020 fire. So, start by taking the top off and getting some paper ready. Paper is special for New Year's. This is the New York Times year in pictures for the last year. So I think it's appropriate to set fire to it. What do you think? All right, the way I do this is a couple of fairly small pieces, and I'm going to place them parallel to one another here. The paper in between. And I'm going to get a few pieces of kindling. Again, just buy it at the local Lowe's or Rona or something like that. It comes in a bag, or you can get birch bark from wherever you get your birch firewood from. That works too. Crisscross that, and then pieces the other way. 1, 2, and then a couple of larger pieces on top. And we're all set. Now I'm going to get my fire later. Just got this the other day. I quite like it. Yes, matches work just fine, but this is better. And there we go. as I showed you earlier, I've got the seat lined and ready to go, so I'm just gonna make myself comfortable. And we're gonna wait for the fire to start up here. Smokes a little bit at the beginning, but once it catches hold, you'll see practically no sparks and no snap, crackle, pop. Maybe just keep a bowl of Rice Krispies nearby if you want that snap, crackle, pop. Anyway. So I'm going to leave you to look at the fire for a little bit. A little bit later on, I'll take the camera back and give you an overview of the whole picture all set up here. And then a little bit later on, I've got a kind of a fire log for the New Year's that I made, again based out of a couple of sheets from the New York Times year-end pictures section, which I then within that wrapped up a bunch of orange peels because they smell very nice, and the sugar bag that I got the other day when I was mixing up barbecue rub to give to people for Christmas, but also to use on things like what I barbecue tonight on my smoker. And sugar bags with sugar in them burn with quite lovely colors. So I'll turn the camera back on. You can have a look at that. I'm going to put it on and we can burn 2020 goodbye. You can see that the dried birch firewood catches really nicely. Just a little bit of kindling and we're away to the races. Just got a very light movement of air out of the east, which is perfect because it keeps the smoke blowing away from me, but it's not enough to make it feel any colder than it already is. We're at about 3 below 0 centigrade right now, so very comfortable. The thing I didn't mention earlier that I also acquired was a length of that flexible metal dryer venting pipe and another one of those duct fans that I talked about earlier, and so I can put the duct fan in the end of that pipe and lay it along the ground here with the pipe aiming towards the fire and get some air going into the bottom end of the fire. Again, I haven't had to do that more than once or twice in the last month or two, but I'm thinking on nights where maybe if I've got some issues with damp wood or it's raining or snowing hard or something like that, a little bit of breeze going into the fire would be helpful. Okay, I'm going to take you for a little walk with the camera back to give you kind of a bigger picture view of the setup here, and then I'm going to shut down for a few minutes, and then when the fire settles just a little bit, I'll turn it back on and burn the New Year's fire log that I built. So you can see the full view. That's my back door right there, and then I've got the tarp and the fire pit, and let me try to move a little bit here so you can see a little bit more of the lights up in the crabapple tree and the lights in the lilac bush behind. And that's the winter burn fire pit. Good luck putting your own together if you decide to go ahead with it. I strongly recommend that you do. It's a lovely way to feel better about being cooped up. Makes you feel not so cooped up in the wintertime up here in Canada during a pandemic. Okay, well, fire's burned down a bit. I'm just going to reposition it a little bit. And I got a couple of things. First is a festive log that I made out of stuff I had lying around the house. It's from the New York Times 2020, A Year Like No Other, the year in pictures. Seemed like a perfectly appropriate thing to start with. Wrapped up inside, I've got some other pages of the paper, but also I have a bunch of orange peels because they smell quite lovely, and the wrapper from a bag of sugar that I used to make some of the barbecue rub that I used tonight, but also to give to other people for Christmas presents. So I'm going to toss that on. And then I found this in the wood pile. This last year has been an incredibly gnarly year, so I've got an incredibly gnarly piece of wood, and I'm going to throw that on top of the fire as well, and that'll mark the end of 2020. I've also got a very nice single malt scotch in a glass on the side table here, so I'll be sipping that while I watch this stuff burn. As my very good friend says, a wee dram now and again kind of keeps your feet firmly planted on the ground. So, wishing everybody a happier and freer new year than the last year that we've had. I'm hoping it will unfold as we go forward, hopefully fairly quickly in positive ways. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed all of this, and enjoy your own burning winter adventures. So we'll start with that. And then the gnarly log on top. Cheers. By the way, I lied earlier. It's actually -8, but still very comfortable. I'm listening to CKUA radio. If you haven't heard of that, it's Alberta Public Radio. Look it up, ckua.com. I guarantee you'll find some stuff that you really enjoy on it. It somehow seems very appropriate that the made entirely out of paper and a few orange peel log that I made to represent 2020 won't even burst into flames in the year-end fire. Oh my. Let's see if we get a little more air into it, and then see if we can get it going. There we go. Anyway, bottom line with all of this, if you're going to do one of these setups, check with your local building code requirement, not building code, but what your city says you have to have in the way of distances from things, whether you're even allowed to have an outdoor fire pit. City Calgary requires that there be a screen over the top, so you've got to have one of those. Got to have a bucket of water nearby. I keep mine inside the back door, so it's not going to freeze, and works. I haven't had to use it yet. It's been fine. But check your local ordinances, and then this is a creative exercise. It's an example of what I like to call bricolage, which is a lovely French term, which basically kind of means art, but also means kind of do-it-yourself, put together with what you've got lying around. So that I'm quite comfortable with the idea that makes me a bricoleur, and that's someone who does that sort of stuff. So I worked this out kind of on my own thinking. Feel free to experiment and be creative, and see what you can do in your own backyard. When I first started looking up for how to winterize a backyard fire pit, But the only example I ran across was a couple of photographs of someone saying, well, the first thing you do is either get your kids to, or pay your kids to build a big snow wall around the fire pit, and then you can put some benches in and you're all set. Well, number one, kids aren't here. Number two, we don't get that much snow, and that's too much of the embracing of winter stuff. I wanted something that was a little more, you know, living room on the back porch, because I don't have a fire inside. So this is the route that I've taken. Anyway. Obviously, you'll need to check about availability of firewood and stuff like that. I would recommend the birch. It's entirely up to you. There was a big run on that this year because, of course, everybody's stuck at home and wants fires. So you kind of have to get on a wait list. But that's the way it goes. Anyway, good luck with your project. If you have any comments, if you have any questions, put them in the comments field down the bottom. A few likes would be nice too. And I'll keep you updated once I think of new things to add to this setup, and once I start experimenting a little more with the smoker. Anyway, take care and fight back. Burn against the winter. Happy New Year.